Hi, I'm Old Norse specialist Dr. Jackson Crawford, and today I want to just briefly address a question that I often receive, which is, are our written sources of Norse myth, by which we mostly mean the two books written in Iceland in the 1200s called Edda, the Poetic Edda and Prose Edda, are these sources too influenced by Christianity to be valid guides to the mythology of pre-Christian Scandinavia? Whenever anyone asks this question or makes this assertion, the Eddas are too influenced by Christianity to be good sources of Norse myth. Note that these people are often presenting their own ideas or 19th or 20th or 21st century ideas about Norse mythology that have nothing to do with anything that's in the Eddas or anywhere else. So I often get pretty suspicious of people who make this claim because, you can answer this question with a question. All right, are the Eddas too influenced by Christianity? Well, are your ideas from 2018 or 1918 or 1818 too influenced by Christianity? I would say they're not any less influenced by Christianity than ideas that were written down in the 1200s that might actually still have a chance of reflecting oral traditions passed down since the Viking Age. Many of the poems of the Poetic Edda have linguistic features that suggest they were not originally composed in the 1200s, but in the 900s or as early as the 800s. Poems such as Völuspá and Hávamál are some of our most important sources for Norse mythology and are, by linguistic evidence, actually from the 900s, so before Iceland converted to Christianity in about 1000. Even Snorri Sturluson is relying as much as he can on poetry, much of which can be reliably dated back that far. And even though he is a Christian writing in a Christian society, you have to remember that Christians or any members of any other religion are not necessarily hostile to the stories of another religion. What they're hostile to is the practice of another religion. And telling an entertaining story about Thor or Loki or Odin doesn't make you any more Ásatru, or whatever you want to call Norse paganism from before the conversion, than somebody today telling a story about Zeus or Mercury or the Iliad or something is a Greek pagan because of that. There's not any particular reason, I would say, for these stories to get just made up out of whole cloth in the 1200s. Now, while I think that the stories for the most part do reflect oral traditions that go back to pre-Christian times, the organization of the myths, especially by Snorri and his Prose Edda, because he's trying to make things really coherent, may in fact reflect a good deal of Christian influence. That includes things like the two afterlives being pretty clear-cut, Valhall for men who die in battle and hell for everybody else, whereas our actual Norse sources show a much more complicated picture than that. Or something like trying to identify Odin as truly, literally the father of all, as Snorri sometimes seems to sort of be edging towards, even though our poems in the Poetic Edda and elsewhere show no evidence of Odin actually being everyone's father, literally. In fact, his title Allfather might not really mean that. Allfather in Old Norse may not mean All-Father. It may mean something like All-Orderer, or so I have speculated based on some linguistic evidence. So really, I just want to make a short video to assure you that serious scholars of Norse mythology and religion rely heavily on the Eddas, especially the Poetic Edda, and then also on some other sources such as skaldic poems that can be dated from the Viking Age, and are not particularly concerned with the extent of Christian influence that people tend to be today, especially when there's something in the Eddas that they don't like or that doesn't mesh up with some kind of modern ideology. Put aside what seems pretty or organized or systematic and thus quote-unquote should have been believed in by the Vikings or the pre-Christian Norse, and look at what's really there in the pages of the poems of the Poetic Edda, and see for yourself what you think these sources really say. I think that it's a much more complicated and interesting picture than any 19th or 20th or 21st century ideologue wants you to believe it is. And even if they don't give us a very clear picture of what it takes to be a practicing pagan in the pre-Christian Norse tradition, remember that they're not meant to, and that your own conclusions about that are potentially just as valid as some other modern gurus. Well, for now, from beautiful Colorado, I'm wishing you all the best.